Hey everybody, this is Josh Clark, a renewable energy consultant with Simple Ray. We've got just another minute here until 1:30, so we'll hold off a second and see if anyone else logs on here in the next minute or two, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here, and maybe we'll have a couple more join in as we go. As I said before, my name is Josh Clark. I'm a renewable energy consultant with Simple Ray, and what I'd like to do today is go over your Alliant Energy bill. I think if you're like most people, there's a really good chance that you get the bill online or in the mail, and you only look at what you owe, and you don't really look at all the other line items on that bill to show you how you got there. So hopefully I'll be able to give you a little bit of an overview on how you can really understand how Alliant has come to that bottom line and what you owe them. And that should hopefully help you understand how you can potentially save yourself some a little bit of money with some changes, or see just exactly how solar energy could help you save money on that bill. So to start with, we'll go over a couple of the key units of billing that you'll see on that bill. So for some people, you will see kW come up a few times on your bill. That stands for kilowatt. And without getting terribly scientific about it, just to talk about, in terms that can be helpful to understand it for you, a kilowatt is essentially a measure of the rate at which electricity is consumed. So if you look at large fixtures, say, high horsepower electric motors, they take a relatively high number of kilowatts of kW to operate. Things like lights, for instance, will take a very low number of kilowatts to operate. The other measure, kWh, that stands for kilowatt hours. And no matter what billing code you're billed under, you will see kilowatt hours on your bill. That is the measure of the total amount of electricity consumed. So it is a relatively non-scientific measurement. It's not exactly a standardized measurement, but that looks at a time value in addition to the number of kW. So you can end up using a lot of kilowatt hours, even if you don't use any specific pieces of equipment that use a great deal of electricity to run. But if you use a small amount of electricity constantly, you still will rack up those kilowatt hours. So first of all, let's look at the most common type of billing for most folks, and that is a non-demand billing code. It could be rate code 600, 607, which is a time of use rate code. There's a number of them, and we don't have to look at individual bills of each rate code, but suffice to say, if you are not billed anyway by demand, you will be billed a relatively high rate per kilowatt hour that you consume over that billing out period. Your meter does record kW because that's how it is able to calculate kilowatt hours, but you are not billed and charged specifically by the kW. You'll only see your bill added up by kilowatt hours. And you'll see, to know the number of kilowatt hours you used in each particular billing period, you'll see I have those kind of squared in here on this bill. So if you look towards the top on the right-hand side, you will see under the heading usage, for this particular customer, 16,500 kilowatt hours. So this bill is a commercial bill, so a high number of kilowatt hours used. And then you'll see that carry down to the charges portion of the bill, and you see that 16,500 number kilowatt hours times a certain number of cents. So there's different rates that are applied to that kilowatt hour number for different things. You see energy cost, energy efficiency programs charge. Above that, you'll actually see that Alliant bills an average daily kilowatt hour charge as well. So just many different ways to get to the same end result. You are being charged for the total aggregate amount of electricity you use over your billing period. You also see a basic service charge there down below. Alliant does also bill that on a daily basis, so your basic service charge is not a flat fee each month. Depending on the number of days in the billing period, that number will change slightly. And then you see at the very bottom your local tax and your state tax. Those are not billed directly by the kilowatt hour, but rather as a percentage of your total bill value. So as you use more electricity, your bill gets higher, the amount you pay in taxes gets higher. So a very common question that we here at Simple Rig get is, what charges on my electric bill can be reduced or eliminated if I go solar? So what I've done here is I've made a green square around all of the charges that can be directly reduced or eliminated by going solar. And what you'll see there is anything that you are charged by the kilowatt hour directly, it can be directly reduced or eliminated by going solar. So as you see here, for someone who is not billed with any demand component, whether it be residential or commercial, solar energy can eliminate, reduce or eliminate the vast majority of your electric bill. Fixed service charges cannot be reduced by solar because you're not billed in relation to the amount of power you use, only the number of days that Alliant provides you service in that billing period. So you see I have those charges X'd out. And you see a yellow square under taxes. Taxes can be, you could say, indirectly reduced by going solar. And the reason that is like I mentioned before, the taxes aren't billed directly by the amount of kilowatt hours you consume, but they do directly relate to the size of your electric bill. So as your electric bill gets smaller by using less kilowatt hours, the amount of taxes you pay also gets smaller. So hopefully that tracks and makes sense for everybody. The other type of billing, and this is more for large commercial or industrial users of, for Alliant, we can look at those as demand billing codes. So this bill here is a rate code 440. There's also, for instance, 447, and that takes time of use into account. But again, for the purposes of this explanation, we can look at them in the same way, where you're billed by the kilowatt hour, just like any other rate code, but you're also billed based on the total number of kilowatts you use at any given point, the highest number. So under demand billing, you're actually charged a relatively low rate per kilowatt hour consumed, and you're charged a relatively high rate based on the highest number of kilowatts you use in that month. And you'll see what I have squared in red here. Actual metered demand and billing demand, you see for this particular customer was 160 kilowatts. What that means is in any 15-minute interval where that meter was recording, the highest number it recorded was 160 kilowatts. So what that means is in that snapshot, there was 160 kilowatts of energy being required by that building. So that doesn't necessarily correspond directly to total energy usage, because that could be a time where, say, 3 or 4 large machines started up all at the same time. So you have a very high draw at that period, but maybe that draw drops off. So the kilowatt usage can be a little difficult to put your finger on just on an electric bill as to when it is happening. The other part that I want to call attention to there, we won't go into huge detail here, but you see the word ratchet, and you see that's a smaller number, 135 in this case. Basically, you need to look at ratchet just like the tool, a ratchet. It moves freely in one direction, but it is not able to go the opposite direction. So what that ratchet number from Alliant means is that even if you drastically reduce your peak kilowatt demand in a certain month, they're still not going to, unfortunately, drastically reduce the amount of money you have to pay them that month. So the ratchet number is tied to 75% of your previous 3 months peak demand. And to make the math really easy, let's just say you had 3 months consecutively where you used where your peak meter demand at any point during the day was 1,000 kilowatts. In month 4, let's say you changed a bunch of equipment, the building shut down for whatever reason. You did very little. Let's say your peak demand was 100 kilowatts. Unfortunately, that month you wouldn't be charged 100 kilowatts. You would be charged 750 kilowatts, because that would be 75% of your previous 3 months. So like a ratchet, Alliant will let you go upwards all that you want, but when you try to pull backwards, they don't really let you do that very easily. So you have to have, for you to reduce that KW charge drastically, you have to have a number of months consecutively where you have reduced usage. For most customers, that doesn't really make a huge difference, because the vast majority of businesses and factories, if you will, that are on demand billing have at least a somewhat constant power demand. But there are some facilities that do vary greatly in the amount of energy they consume, and that ratchet can be a bit of a problem for them. So if you look down to the charges portion of the bill, you see here that the KW, the kilowatt charges for demand, actually do make up the vast majority of the bill here. And all of those kilowatt hours that are being billed, they don't make up near as much of the bill. So the rate is very drastically lower in these rate codes per kilowatt hour than it is for the rate codes that we talked about previously, where that demand component is not part of the bill. That'll lead us into a discussion about, if I'm a demand customer, what charges can I reduce with solar? So just like before, anything that is charged directly by the kilowatt hour can be reduced or eliminated by going solar. The difference is all of those reductions will be worth less money to you in savings, because you're being charged at a much lower rate. Everything that you are charged by the kilowatt, by the KW, savings on those charges cannot be guaranteed by going solar. Now, there is a chance that you will see reductions in your peak demand, depending on when those peak demands happen in your particular business. But just by looking at electric bills, there's no way that we, or any other solar company for that matter, can tell you for sure what we can or cannot reduce for you. Now, there are ways to make an educated guess on demand reduction, but that includes having at least a year's worth of interval data. Sometimes we're able to get that from the utility. Oftentimes that would entail some monitoring equipment that is put on and left at the site for a while for us to do some calculations. And even in that case, it's only a best guess, because as everyone knows, what you have done and the way you've consumed energy in the past does not necessarily mean that's exactly the way you'll consume energy in the future. So the reason why solar energy can't necessarily guarantee you reductions in peak demand charges is because there's no way to guarantee that your solar array will be producing electricity at the exact time that that peak demand hits, especially if you're a facility that runs 2 or 3 shifts. So then in that case, your solar array in the middle of the night is not producing any energy. Your machines in your building are running. Therefore, your peak demand could very well happen in the middle of the night. Even if it's just in one day of the month, then those demand charges will not be reduced at all by solar energy. So one caveat to that discussion is battery storage can be implemented to try to help offset those peak demand charges. And that's definitely something we can look into and study, but it does take a great deal of data for us to be able to accurately make those predictions. So just the same as with any other billing code, any fixed service charges can't be reduced. Typically, you don't have fixed service charges on the Alliant demand billing codes anyway. And just like before, the taxes can be indirectly reduced. So you'll see what I've squared there on this bill. The portion in green that you can definitely reduce or remove completely from solar energy is actually only a small portion of the bill for those demand customers. So that can be a disappointing conversation to have sometimes, but know that there are ways to remove yourself from that billing code, and there are ways that with additional monitoring, we can understand when those peak demands are happening, and then we can have a better idea of what reductions you could see from solar energy. So it's not impossible. It's just that there's a lot more work to be done to determine it. So for anybody that's watching this webinar who has already installed solar or has already agreed to and will be getting solar energy enabled, if you will, bills down the road, I'll show you exactly how to read those. So at the top, you'll see information above the word delivered. So delivered, that is referring to the amount of kilowatt hours that Alliant Energy delivered to you. So whenever you are consuming energy at a greater rate than your solar energy system is producing it, you'll still be getting energy from the grid from Alliant Energy, and that is metered. You'll see in this case it was 4,800 kilowatt hours. Below that, you'll see information for received energy. That is energy that Alliant received from you. So whenever your array is producing more power than you need in any given moment, you'll put that power back on the grid, your meter will record it, and your account will be credited at that 1-to-1 kilowatt hour per kilowatt, to kilowatt hour rate. So essentially you have the kilowatt hours you give Alliant carry the same value as the kilowatt hours that you get from Alliant. So that brings us to the bottom portion of the bill, where those numbers are carried down from above to below. You see the received generation and you see the consumption. Of course, they wouldn't make it simple and use the exact same words, or even, as you'll see, the exact same numbers. But you can see that the numbers are close enough. You'll see what corresponds to what. So this particular customer, they gave Alliant to the grid 5,175 kilowatt hours. They consumed from the grid 4,796, which left them with a positive net metering balance. So they had 379 kilowatt hours above what they needed. So therefore, you'll see there in the middle, they did not have to pay Alliant Energy anything for their electricity that month, because they actually gave Alliant more electricity than they took from Alliant. So you see, the only thing they're being charged there is their basic service charge and the very small amount of taxes that corresponds to that amount of spend. So a $21 electric bill pretty easy to live with there. The net metering balance, also want to add, that will carry over to the next month. So next month, this customer would have had 379 kilowatt hours ahead to start off with without any sort of overproduction. For anybody watching this that already does have solar and has access to a monitoring portal, you probably already know this, but if not, this can be useful. You will almost never, maybe never, see the kilowatt hours produced by solar on your monitoring portal line up exactly with the kilowatt hours received by Alliant. The reason that is, there will almost always be some instances where your array is producing exactly the amount of power that you're needing. So therefore, your meter is not recording kilowatt hours either coming to you or going back to Alliant. So you are saving money at those times because you're not pulling any power from the grid. You're just not giving Alliant anything back to the grid either. So you're not getting those net metering credits being accrued. So there always will be a difference there between what your monitoring tells you and what your bill shows you. And that can be confusing for people sometimes. So that's really all I have for this webinar. Just wanted to talk about the basics and give you guys a little bit of information to help you really gain some value from looking at that electric bill rather than just getting the bill and paying it. And I especially want to reiterate that Alliant Energy, just like any other utility company, any other company, there are a bunch of human beings that work there and do this work, so they make mistakes. It's not impossible, and I'm sure we've all talked to people who have been in this situation where your electric bill is incorrect. So now with a little bit of knowledge to understand just how to read that bill, it's a good idea every time you get that bill online or in the mail, just take a couple minutes and read through it and make sure it makes sense and adds up. And before you just send that check, it doesn't hurt to make sure that you're actually being billed correctly. So I'll wait a second here and see if anybody asks any questions through the questions sections. I'll be happy to try to answer those. And if there aren't questions that you think of right now in the moment, by all means, please send any to any of the contact methods that you see above here on the last slide, and we'll be happy to get some answers for you. I appreciate everybody logging in today. All right, doesn't look like we have any questions now, but thank you very much again.